Welcome to Law in Focus. I'm Molly.
And I'm Maitha.
We're two teens who can be defined as people who love the law. We know that sounds a little wild, but hear us out. Law is dramatic, it's messy, it's complicated, and it's so much more than dusty courtrooms.
That's why we made this podcast, to make law fun, accessible, and something you'll actually want to talk about. We'll cover criminal law, corporate law, and even those bizarre seen only on TikTok type laws.
And to kick it off, we're starting with a case that's part true crime,
part courtroom thriller. Please introduce the Menendez brothers.
So here's the crime. In 1989, brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez shot and killed their parents, Kitty and Jose Menendez. This happened in their Beverly Hills home. At first, police thought it was a robbery. The scene was staged, there was no obvious motive, and the brothers acted like grieving sons.
But eventually, suspicion shifted. Here's why. The brothers went on a spending spree after their parents' death. Hundreds of thousands of dollars on cars, designer clothes, and even courtside Knicks tickets. And of course, then came the confession. Eric admitted the crime to his psychologist, whose own mistress reported it. And of course, that broke open the case.
Now, let's zoom into the law. The brothers were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy. First degree means the prosecution had to prove premeditation, or that the killings were planned in advance. They weren't just spontaneous.
And of course, that's where the shotguns come in. More on this later, but the prosecution argued that buying and practicing with the weapons proved premeditation. The defense countered by saying the killings weren't planned, but driven by years of trauma and fear. This is where psychology meets law. How do you prove imminent danger when the abuser isn't literally attacking in the moment?
Exactly. Self-defense law is very specific. To claim self-defense, you usually need an immediate threat, someone actively about to harm you. The defense tried to argue battered child syndrome, similar to battered woman defense, saying that the years of abuse made the brothers reasonably believe their lives were in danger.
But here's the problem. The judge in trial number 2 restricted a lot of psychological and familial testimony as hearsay. Of course, because Jose was dead, he couldn't be cross-examined, so testimony about what he did was considered extremely unreliable. And that gutted the defense's case.
Meanwhile, the prosecution hammered the financial motive. Under California law, financial gain is a special circumstance that makes murder eligible for the harshest penalties. The jury saw the spending spree, the inheritance, and the planned weapons as stronger evidence than the abuse claims.
So, what happened? Well, trial number 1 ended in a mistrial because 2 separate juries couldn't agree. Interestingly, with the female jurors leaning towards manslaughter, which is a lighter charge, and the male jurors favoring first-degree murder. But, of course, in trial number 2, with one jury and extremely restricted psychological testimony, both brothers were found guilty of first-degree murder in 1996 and sentenced to life without parole.
To elaborate on trial 2, it was a joint trial, and it happened in 1995 with the same judge as the first trial. Both brothers, like we said, were found guilty of first-degree murder, and in this trial, the judge restricted so much psychological testimony. It was considered hearsay unless the alleged abuser, their deceased dad, could be cross-examined. This made it much harder for the defense to establish the emotional context behind the killings.
Of course, the prosecutor focused on the fact that the brothers planned the murder by buying and practicing with the shotguns.
The defense claimed the killings were not planned, but the results of years of trauma and fear.
The financial motive and the fact the brothers spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and of course, the inheritance.
The defense couldn't explain this. They focused on Eric's confession to his therapist, which was then revealed to his therapist's mistress, who revealed it to the court, ultimately getting around the doctor-patient confidentiality.
Lastly, they focused on the point that the brothers were no imminent threat, as their father nor their mother at time were abusing them or about to abuse them. So the court concluded that the brothers had time to leave and seek help, but instead stayed at the house and killed.
The defense argued the brothers believed their parents were going to kill them, introducing some testimony from the family and psychologists about Kitty and Jose's mental health and treatment of the boys. But, like we said earlier, they were limited by court rulings. Their sentence was life in prison without possibility of parole. And the prosecution won this second trial because they linked the murder to financial gain. And like we said, the defense could not explain this. Unlike the first trial, there was no chance of two separate jury opinions, and the public had soured after the brothers' lavish spendings had been exposed.
Overall, the case is extremely complicated and is ongoing today, with new evidence and calls for retrial periodically surfacing, especially with social media and documentary exposure, as we're sure you all know. The Menendez brothers are still currently serving their life sentence with no chance of parole. However, there are many resentencing petitions in progress, and new evidence could always trigger a retrial or even a reduced sentence. The brothers have so far served 29 years out of life, and the only current possibility of release is if a judge grants resentencing or a laws change to apply retroactively to their case.
Here's the legal takeaway. The difference between those two trials shows how much procedure matters. The same facts, but with a very different jury setup and different rules of evidence, completely change the outcome. That's the power and the danger of courtroom law.
And even today, people debate whether justice was really served. With social media, new petitions, and of course, calls for retrial, this case hasn't faded. It's a reminder that trials aren't just about guilt or innocence. They're about what evidence gets in, how juries are structured, and how lawyers frame the story.
All right, let's move on into the question segment.
Okay, Molly. First question. Should self-defense extend to situations of long-term abuse, even if there's no immediate attack?
I believe they should. Long-term abuse, like in the name, is long-term, and therefore, in this case, the boys could be defending themselves from future attacks or even avenging past ones. Second, was restricting the psychological testimony fair, or did it silence the defense's entire case?
Well, I have complicated feelings on this one. On one hand, at the time the trial and the sentencing happened in 1996, it was an extremely different world from today. We didn't have half the psychological reasoning, evidence, or research that we do today. But on the other, any sort of psychological testimony at the time could have completely helped the defense's case. Because as we said earlier, the lack of evidence and psychological testimony of both Kitty and Jose completely gutted the defense's case. And of course, for you, Molly, our third and final question. How much should a jury weigh motive like money versus trauma?
In this case, I think money and trauma should have been weighed pretty equally, as they were both would have played a big part in the prosecution's and defense's case. But since trauma was taken away, it completely gave the defense a disadvantage versus the prosecution's advantage, was having the motive of money on their side.
I totally agree.
Now it's time for our game, Law or Nah. Mayla, hit me with today's crazy law.
All right, today's a little bit of a weird one. In Wisconsin, is it illegal to sell margarine, also known as a butter substitute?
No.
Wrong. For all you butter nerds, unfortunately, margarine is just not it in Wisconsin. So if you want to bake, you're going to have to do it with real Wisconsin butter.
See, this is why we love law. It's equal parts serious and absolutely ridiculous. That's it for episode 1 of Law in Focus.
Next week, we're shifting into corporate law, my specialty, to talk about a landmark case that redefined company responsibility.
Thanks for tuning in, because law doesn't have to be boring.